Prompt engineering for text-to-image models like dALL-E and Stable Diffusion. Intro to image prompting. Figuring out the best prompt to create a perfect image is a particular challenge. Research into methods to do so is not quite as developed as text prompting. This may be due to inherent challenges in creating objects which are fundamentally subjective and often lack good accuracy metrics. However, fear not, as the image prompting community has made great discoveries about how to prompt various image models. This guide does not currently cover image prompting techniques. Instead, I provide an example of the end-to-end process below, along with some great resources to get started. Example. Here I will go through an example of how I created the images for the front page of this course. I had been experimenting with low poly style for a deep reinforcement learning neural radiance field project. I liked the low poly style, and wanted to use it for this course's images. I wanted an astronaut, a rocket, and a computer for the images on the front page. I did a bunch of research into how to create low poly images on R, Stable Diffusion, https://www.reddit.com/r/Stable Diffusion/ and other sites, but couldn't find anything super helpful. I decided to just start with dALL-E and the prompt low poly white and blue rocket shooting to the moon in front of a sparse green meadow and see what happened. I thought these results were pretty decent for a first try. I particularly liked the bottom left rocket. Next, I wanted a computer in the same style. Low poly white and blue computer sitting in a sparse green meadow. Finally, I needed an astronaut. Low poly white and blue astronaut sitting in a sparse green meadow with low poly mountains in the background seemed to do the trick. I thought the second one was decent. The problem with the good pictures was that the style wasn't the same in each one. After more research on R, Stable Diffusion, I found people using the word isometric. I decided to try that out, using Stable Diffusion instead of dALL-E. I had to add more modifiers to my prompt to constrain the style. I tried this prompt, a low poly world, with an astronaut in white suit and blue visor sitting in a sparse green meadow with low poly mountains in the background. Highly detailed, isometric, 4K. These weren't great, so I decided to start on the rocket instead. A low poly world, with a white and blue rocket blasting off from a sparse green meadow with low poly mountains in the background. Highly detailed, isometric, 4K. These are not particularly good. After a bit of iterating around here, I ended up with now I needed a better laptop. A low poly world, with a white and blue laptop sitting in sparse green meadow with low poly mountains in the background. The screen is completely blue. Highly detailed, isometric, 4K. I got some inconsistent results. I liked the bottom right one, but I decided to go in a different direction. A low poly world, with a glowing white and blue gemstone sitting in a sparse green meadow with low poly mountains in the background. Highly detailed, isometric, 4K. This wasn't quite right. Let's try something magical and glowing. A low poly world, with a glowing white and blue gemstone magically floating in the middle of the screen above a sparse green meadow with low poly mountains in the background. Highly detailed, isometric, 4K. I liked these, but wanted the stone in the middle of the screen. A low poly world, with a glowing blue gemstone magically floating in the middle of the screen above a sparse green meadow with low poly mountains in the background. Highly detailed, isometric, 4K. Somewhere around here. I used SD's ability to have a previous image provide some influence for future images. And thus I arrived at. Finally, I was onto the astronaut. A low poly world, with an astronaut in white suit and blue visor is sitting in a sparse green meadow with low poly mountains in the background. Highly detailed, isometric, 4K. At this point, I was sufficiently happy with the style consistency between my three images to use them on the website. The main takeaways for me were that this was a very iterative, research-heavy process, and I had to modify my expectations and ideas as I experimented with different prompts and models.